Comrades, we're here to discuss today the idea of is Labour dead? We have a panel here. We have Roger Silverman, who stood for the NEC and got to, he tells me, the 30-something round before he lost it. He's part of Newham Socialist Labour, and he runs an international discussion group of socialists called Workers' International Network. We've got Mandy, whose main description is troublemaker. She's now an independent councillor in Cheshire, having left or been kicked out of, I'm not quite sure which, the Labour Party, and is a member of Resist. And Resist is now joining forces with the SLP. We've got Kevin Bean, who is was Secretary of Liverpool Wavertree CLP and is part of Labour Party Marxists. And I think we're supposed to have Dave Nellist, but he's not here yet. I think he might have been hijacked by some of those very abstemious members of my 47 and found better company in the pub. But we'll see. He'll be here soon. Right. And there's me. I'm Felicity Dowling. I'm principal speaker for Left Unity and a member of the European Left Party. Expelled from the Labour Party after the 47 campaign and always managed to stay active even though I was expelled from the Labour Party. Right, I'm going to open with just a couple of words. I didn't expect to do a major contribution, but I'm going to start with a couple of words. I think that we have to bear in mind that the word Labour is more than the members of the Labour Party, more than the leadership, more than the policies. It's a history, an important part of history built up over generations, organising people for an anti-ruling class vote. And many, many people who don't think in depth about politics have got this visceral connection to voting Labour. And the Labour movement, of course, is wider than the Labour vote. It's the organised working class. Now, that involves the trade unions and it involves community groups which see themselves as part of the working class. That's very common in Liverpool. If you think about Hillsborough, you think about fans supporting food banks, it's the organised working class and the campaigns for health. Now, we're entering, and I think everyone here is aware, although probably not having watched as much telly as we might normally do this week with all the meetings, that the economic background that we're facing is critical. That poverty is rising dramatically, and people who previously thought their job was, fairly steady and had a decent income are themselves feeling the pinch. The rich are ever richer, and we now have a form of gangster capitalism where disaster capitalism, yes, they'll take advantage of a disaster, but they'll also create disasters if that will make a profit for them. There was a story in the papers today about, in America, how hedge funds have been looking at hospitals and they've been doing to them what they've done to football clubs. They've taken the hospital, they've worked to remove its charitable status. They've then loaded the hospital up with debts. So a hospital which previously owned its own building now no longer owns its building and has to pay a huge sum of money every month to these gangster capitalists. They do not care of the damage that they do to healthcare. That's the States, but similar models are happening here. But capitalism also has its crisis, and we can see it. We remember the bankers' crash. But we can see similar things moving now in capitalism. We've basically, with this Truss government, seen an end to any pretense of a welfare state. They think they can walk all over us. They have every intention of reducing our living standards brutally. And we know that that's happening in other countries around the world. The situation in Brazil, for example, is very similar to what we're facing. We've got a climate crisis on our hands, which is affecting us day by day. Cuba at the moment has no power on the island at all, having been hit by a hurricane. Those hurricanes will come again and again and again, and we have to be prepared to manage what's happening to us in terms of climate. But the capitalist class care nothing for that. The working class is globalized, and one of the bits we can look to in terms of health, in terms of hope, is the huge struggle that went on in India in 2020, 2021, where the farmers took on the government and forced the repeal of 3 major acts designed to take capitalism even deeper into the agricultural system. So they won, and they won hands down after a year-long fight. So the role of socialists is to describe, to organise, to present an alternative within the working class. We have to be able to speak with our class, discuss with our class, organise with our class, and we have to be able to speak with the youth and offer an alternative to the world that we are facing. We pick on the experience of other struggles and the struggles of those who've gone before us. We're anti-racist, we're feminist, we're internationalist, we're eco-socialist. What we're really discussing here is, where do people who have those views work in relation to the class movement, particularly in the UK at this minute? What do we do in our work in the trade unions? What do we do in the communities? What do we do in campaigns? And what is our relation to the electoral system? Do we stand candidates? Do we support Labour? What should we be doing? Can we build a movement as active, as embedded in the working class as we built in the 80s in Liverpool? Because we won't win unless we do. Can we do that? Can we do that with people in other countries? Can we do it across the generations here? Can we do it by getting deep into the class in different areas? So at that point, I'm in finishing my contribution. I'm going to ask Roger to speak next. Dave has now joined us. I accused you of being taken away to the pub by the 47.
Right, comrades. Well, is Labour dead? What an easy question. What else can you call a party which in successive by-elections loses 2/3 of the votes it got in the same constituencies at a general election just a couple of years earlier? A party which has lost at least 200,000 members and whose financial balance sheet has slumped from record reserves of £13 million to the brink of bankruptcy. A party which now spends more money on legal costs against its own members than on political campaigning. A party where you can win an overwhelming victory in a leadership election, build the biggest political party in Europe, gain 3.5 million extra votes at an election, and then find yourself expelled from the parliamentary party. Where you can win a seat on the National Executive Committee and get kicked out of the party before you've attended your very first meeting. So is Labour dead? Absolutely. It's been twitching on its deathbed for a quarter of a century, stricken by a deadly plague. True, it managed just one last brief heroic rally, a kind of spasm, and then finally succumbed. It's not resting, it's not stunned, it's not pining for the fjords. It's as dead as Monty Python's parrot. This is a dead party. Now, it wasn't always dead. Labour was founded as the political voice of the trade unions. It was born out of the class struggle. The clue is in the name. It was the party of Labour in its struggle with capital. Yes, it was always crippled by betrayal, a phenomenon highlighted from the very start in the immortal words of the party anthem, the red flag, though cowards flinch and traitors sneer. But for all its infestation with treachery and cowardice, it started life as the party of the British working class. And that's why, even prior to its adoption of a socialist programme, Lenin had recommended its affiliation to the Socialist International on the grounds that, as he put it, Labour may not recognise the class struggle, but the class struggle will inevitably recognise the Labour Party. And that's exactly what happened. In 1918, under the impact of the Russian Revolution, Labour adopted a socialist programme, Clause 4, which proclaimed as its goal to secure for the workers, by hand or by brain, the full fruits of their industry, upon the basis of the common ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange, and the best obtainable system of popular administration and control. Now that's as good a definition as we need. And at the same party conference, it pledged, quote, to play no role in reconstituting or defending capitalism and to enact fundamental redistribution of power from the bosses to the working class. Okay, Labour was never a revolutionary party, to be sure, but it was a socialist party exactly in the mould of its European counterparts. Clause 4 remained the stated goal of the Labour Party for more than 3/4 of a century. When in 1959 the right-wing Labour leader Gaitskell, who was a kind of precursor of Blair, tried to remove it, he was thwarted by a furious revolt from the ranks of the CLPs and the affiliated trade union branches. Yeah, the traitors at the party's head had sneered, and the cowards of the parliamentary left had flinched. But the rank and file did keep the red flag flying, and to prove it, they made sure that Clause 4 was even printed on every party membership card. Now that's why I'm afraid it's lazy journalistic impressionism to dismiss the Labour Party as merely, quote, a party with socialists in it, as a recent book was titled. That was just a witty throwaway tagline by Tony Benn. The Labour Party at its core remained a socialist party. It was not until 1994 that the membership reluctantly let the leaders abandon the party's nominal socialist aspirations. But what did it take? It took 4 successive election defeats, the crushing of the miners and the print workers, the brutal dismantling of industrial working class communities, the privatisation of the nationalised industries, the worldwide collapse of the dying Starlist states, and a carnival of capitalist triumphalism to overcome rank-and-file resistance before Labour succumbed to this takeover by an alien crypto-Tory clique masquerading under the label New Labour. So those who shrug off the abandonment of Clause 4 as, after all, just a scrap of paper are wrong. Tony Blair certainly didn't think it was just a scrap of paper. His very first act on becoming leader was to convene a special conference to remove Clause 4. And why was that? Precisely as a ritual guarantee to the ruling class that New Labour could henceforth be trusted as its faithful servant, that it would no longer even pretend to aspire to change society. Blair even spelt out in so many words that this was a new party, New Labour. Mandelson boasted that he was intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. And for the next decade or more, New Labour remained the favoured party of the British ruling class. Big business poured lavish donations into its coffers. For the first time in its history, the Tory party found itself starved of funds. The media mogul Rupert Murdoch, who had rightly boasted that it was the Sun what won it for the Tories in 1992, threw all his power into supporting New Labour in 1997. And that marked a decisive positive change. Can we imagine Blair complaining, as Wilson did in 1964, that there was a strike of capital against his government? Or Gordon Brown denouncing the gnomes of Zurich, as his namesake George Brown did in those days? Can we envisage a future Starmer government facing the imminent threat of a military coup, as Wilson did twice, in the 1960s and then again in the 1970s, at the hands of Cecil King, the Murdoch of his day, and the Royal Lord Mountbatten? It was only following the 2008 crash that the capitalists pulled their support and restored power to their traditional party, the Tories. So the question is, how is it that in 2015 the left won the leadership? Only due to a colossally stupid blunder on the part of the Blairites. Enraged that in 2010 their favourite had lost to the trade union's preferred candidate, Ed Miliband. In their arrogance, they had deluded themselves that by opening the floodgates to all and sundry and giving a vote to anyone with a spare £3, they could ensure the victory of another Blairite. It was a colossal misjudgment. Inspired by Corbyn's massive victory, hundreds of thousands flooded into the party, but they never came near to taking control of it. The Blairite bureaucracy tightened its grip. The parliamentary careerists plotted to undermine the elected leader. The party machine spitefully sabotaged it. Jeremy Corbyn found himself a helpless hostage and fatally failed to mobilise the forces to send them packing. So the bleating mantra that our time will come, I'm afraid that's a pathetic delusion. Our time did come, and then it went. It's gone. We will never again win the leadership. The Blairites will never again make that mistake. As in literally every consecutive leadership election, in future elections too, they will once again change the rules to suit their interests. But even if the left were to win the leadership again, the bureaucracy's control of the parliamentary clique and the party bureaucracy will remain intact. We're engaged in a life and death struggle. The paid agents of the ruling class are hell-bent on exorcising the spectre of socialism. And that's why a split is inevitable. It's long overdue. A one-sided split is being ruthlessly enforced right now by the right wing. They are determined on a mass purge. Thousands of activists are being terminated. Hundreds of thousands have left the party in despair. Now, I know this is not the first purge of the lefts. There have been witch hunts in every generation, under Attlee, under Gaitskell, under Kinnock. But in the past, there were at least the trappings of due process. As comrades can tell you, each one of the Liverpool councillors had the right to appear in person before the National Executive to put their case before their expulsion. When the militant editorial board were expelled, Ted Grant himself was given the right to appeal directly in a 5-minute speech to the entire Labour Party conference. And now, well, I simply got an email telling me my membership was terminated. Thousands of party activists have been expelled by a mere click on a keyboard. It's a process which makes Alice in Wonderland justice look civilised. There you got the sentence first, but at least afterwards you got a trial. Even Stalin felt it necessary to stage at least a show trial. The nearest parallel to life in Starmer's Labour Party is probably Kafka's novel, The Trial. So those who see this as simply another round in an endless, repetitive cycle need to wake up. Starmer and Evans have crushed all opposition and all democratic rights. This is not just a purge, it's a systematic destruction of the party. It's a one-sided split. It's a split pursued with ruthless determination by one side, while the other, stunned, is still stumbling and only just picking itself up off the ground. If the Socialist campaign group had taken a clear lead, we could already have a mass left party of hundreds of thousands. As it is, the split is still taking place, but it's in a slow, messy, protracted, one-sided and uncoordinated way. And yet, make no mistake, on a local scale, up and down the country, it's happening right now, with shadow CLPs springing up, spontaneous meetings and campaigns, and Zoom meetings attracting hundreds and sometimes even thousands of participants. Britain is entering a period of unprecedented class struggles. Strikes encompassing not just rail and postal workers, but the entire working class, from Amazon warehouse workers to barristers and doctors, as well as mass civil disobedience in Enough is Enough, Don't Pay, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, etc. It's like a combination of the industrial strike wave of the 1970s plus the 14 million strong poll tax boycott of the late 80s. We now have a far-right government every bit as repressive as the new governments in Sweden or Italy. It's hell-bent on an all-out confrontation. It's consciously provoking struggles not seen for a century since the general strike. So we don't have the luxury of hesitation. The creation of a genuine workers' party is urgent. But this is something we need to consider. Mass Workers' Party can't be simply conjured up by a snap of the fingers. No individual, no matter how charismatic, can create such a party out of thin air. The stage is littered with the political corpses of one harakiri martyr after another. James Maxton, the charismatic ILP leader, who in 1932 led its exodus from the Labour Party into oblivion. Arthur Scargill, leader of the Britain's greatest strike since 1926. George Galloway, who at least had won a stunning by-election victory. Militant, which had led the Liverpool Council revolt, as we heard today, and the poll tax boycott campaigns against Thatcher. The Socialist Workers' Party, and so many other now impotent fringe groups. So, comrades, the time has come. We need not just yet another socialist sect, but a mass movement of the working class. Keir Starmer yesterday called Labour a party of the centre. It may temporarily even be an alternative government, but it's in effect a more rational Tory government. But this is not a party, and it's certainly not a party of Labour. There's a huge gaping vacuum. If this is a party of the centre, well, it's time we had a party of the left. If any further proof were needed that Labour is dead, Starmer just demonstrated it with one act. When he banned shadow cabinet ministers from standing on picket lines, that was a definitive moment. It was an explicit declaration that this is emphatically not the party of Labour. Every trade union and every affiliated organisation needs to draw the obvious conclusion and sever its last remaining links. Full congratulations to the Bakers Union. Full support to Unite in its beginning of disengagement from the Labour Party. But every trade union and every affiliated organisation needs to sever its last remaining links. Let the call come out from here. Smash the link with Starmer's pale Tory party. It's time to build a mass party of Labour. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks. I don't feel quite so worried about saying what I'm going to say now that I've seen all the agreement in the room for that. So I'm a local councillor in Cheshire. I joined the Labour Party for Corbyn, as so many of us did. I've always voted Labour. I can remember I was a single mum, very young, living in Derby. I'd branched out and decided to go to university and put my backpack on and took my daughter with me, and off we went. And I remember Tony Blair being elected, and I can remember having some hope about that, as well as some trepidation and not feeling quite too sure about it. And then a few years later, I was working on the front line supporting families in Birkenhead, where I'd lived previously as a teenage mum in a bedsit. And I was supporting families on the front line, and I was involved in the Sure Start, the first wave of children's centres, which was the Blairite Sure Start programme, which is much celebrated. But as a socialist at the time, I can remember seeing that and seeing all of the missed opportunities and seeing it really as a very surface intervention. It's something that we celebrate. But for me, it could have gone so much further. It was kind of top down, the way that it was done. It could have been led and run by local communities. It could have been an opportunity for women to go back to college or go to university, be supported to get into well-paid jobs, and instead women were being encouraged to go into low-status, low-paid work, such as childcare for wealthier women, and it really just reinforced that the existing social strata, really. So as a socialist, I felt disappointed and disillusioned by that, and then it just went from bad to worse with PFI and the Iraq War and one thing and another. So I joined the Labour Party when Corbyn took over the leadership, and as has been said, that was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a miracle that it happened, and there must have been a huge appetite just before that change, just by the sheer number of us that piled onto that and joined with such enthusiasm. And I have to admit that I did become disillusioned with that after a couple of years, because it felt like we sabotaged ourselves in some ways. We weren't clear enough about making explicit the difference between Corbyn's leadership and our socialism and Blairism and the Blair period, which absolutely hemorrhaged votes from the working class, which absolutely alienated the working class from left politics, absolutely in an absolutely devastating way. And then, you know, we were encouraging, because I was a member of CLPD Executive eventually, and within CLPD Exec we sided with Unite very often, the union, and we were encouraging left-wing members to vote against ourselves effectively for fast-track expulsions, against mandatory reselections and so on. And we were all encouraged to be quiet, you know, about the witch hunting that went on and the terrible treatment of our comrades. And that felt wrong. It felt wrong and it felt dishonest. And so, but despite that I felt that disillusionment again, I still carried on being dedicated, as we all did, as most of us did, right to the bitter end almost. I wasn't chucked out, but eventually I did leave. But I caused a load of trouble before I did, which I'm very proud of. So yeah, and this philosophy of don't rock the boat, you know, try to be conciliatory. I think as soon as they had bared their teeth, the right wing, as soon as they had done that chicken coup, or even before that, as soon as they'd shown us what their intention was and who they were, that should have been the game changer, and that should have been the point at which we became angry and we said no more. On behalf of all of these members, you know, who don't have a lot of time and a lot of energy, we're all a lot more squeezed now economically than we were 20 years ago, when Blair could have changed all of that for us a lot more drastically than he did. You know, we were still there, and it was a betrayal really of us, I felt. And I felt that there was a social class element to that as well, if I may say so, because I do feel that if you have known genuine struggle in your life, and then someone bares their teeth and they show you who you are, you don't respond by being conciliatory and hoping that we're thinking the best of them and hoping that they're going to change. You know that you have to fight back, you know. So I think that although that was not deliberate on the part of Jeremy Corbyn, I think that if we would have if we'd have made more of an effort to make sure that the socialism and the membership and the people who were in positions of influence within the Labour Party under Corbyn's leadership were from the working class, hard-pressed, life-hardened grassroots, I think that we might have had more impact and we might have made decisions a little bit differently. So that's the first thing to say. I think this thing, there was something mentioned, oh yeah, I want to just say as well about that. So I think when we're thinking about what we do now, because we are where we are, you know, we can't turn the clock back, I think we definitely have to reflect on that. And as painful as it is, I think we have to be honest about the tricks that were missed and what we could have done differently, in order that we can improve and do things differently going forward. And although people may feel exhausted at this point, and I know that we all do, and it does look fairly hopeless, and for me, I don't see a way back within the current Labour Party. I'm not hearing from any of the Socialist campaign group that have gone around the country doing little rallies, which are there's a pathetic attendance at them. There's people in dribs and drabs turning up, hoping to hear something hopeful and being encouraged to stay in and fight, and this is your party and this is our history. And it's never worked well before, you know, if people have split off or whatever. I just think we're in a different situation now. Corbyn's chance was an accident. It wasn't meant to happen. They've closed that down. I asked Richard Bergen when he came to speak in Chester, because I was invited by my friend to go along to that Socialist campaign party talk, and I thought, oh God, I don't think I should go, because I think I'm just going to bring everybody down, because as ever, I'm not going to be able to sit on my hands and not say what I'm thinking, and so I'd be better staying away. But I did go along out of interest, just to see, is there a route back? Is there some way that they can get the numbers on the PLP? Do they have someone genuinely left-wing in mind? Even if they're not going to tell us straight out what the game plan is there a game plan, you know? And I asked him, and there isn't, you know? So to me, after what's been done to people, the way that people have been treated, the impacts on people's mental health, not to mention the impacts on people's confidence as a left, you know, and our cohesiveness and our energy as a left, it feels unethical for someone who's in a highly paid position to be saying, oh yes, you know, you all need to stay members and fight, when there isn't a game plan, you know. And they can say, well, the justification for that is I can stand up in Parliament and there's a left voice in Parliament. Well, so what? You know, if you go too far and you say the wrong thing, they'll come down on you like a ton of bricks. You'll be threatened with them withdrawing the whip. You'll be terrified that you're not going to win your seat next time or that you're going to be deselected. And you're going to toe the line and you're not going to say anything out of line ever again. So to me, it feels disingenuous, and I think that door is closed. And I wish I wasn't here saying that to you, but I think we have to be fair to ourselves and be realistic about that. So the kinds of qualities that we need in people who are representing us, I think, going forward, if we start a new party or if we have a number of left parties that eventually join together or whatever it is that happens, I think those qualities are things like courage, things like backbone, things like genuine anger. So on Sunday, we had a slightly disastrous situation with the sound tech, but we had an absolutely amazing event at the Liner in Liverpool, Resist, as an organisation which is headed up by Chris Williamson. Chris was there on a live link because he's recovering from COVID. He's supposed to be here speaking today, but I'm here in his place. And it was a shame that not many people heard it, but we had some fantastic speakers. We had an amazing vibe in the room. That vibe is still there, and we need to nurture that and build on that. And we had John Dunn speaking, and it really made me think again. It really reiterated to me, you know, my confidence that people who are from working class backgrounds, who've headed off struggle and who fight and struggle every day of their lives, when they're politicised, they are an incredibly potent force. We need to believe in people like that more, and people need to hear from those people more as well. He brought the house down with his speech. I know he does a lot of shouting, and you might want someone a bit more polished, like I don't know, Mick Lynch or Eddie Dempsey for putting on the BBC, perhaps. But you know, we need to encourage people who are genuinely angry, who are really furious. I think that's a good thing for people to hear, and make sure that we're providing the means for those people to kind of come to the surface within our left movements and lead them, have confidence in those people to lead them. So yeah, Resist is joining forces with the SLP. That's Arthur Scargill started that in the late 90s. That was around about the time that Tony Blair was elected. If only that would have taken off at that time, we'd have saved ourselves, over 2 decades. Well, however long it was less than 2 decades. But up until this point now, the amount of damage that's been done to communities and to left-wing working class political confidence is immeasurable, and we would have saved ourselves that if we'd have been able to get that off the ground at that point in time. I do believe now is the right time for us to do this. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. The organisation is going to need support from the inside to build up those structures, but I think because it's got that bedrock of working class socialism, it's a bloody good place to start. So get in touch with us at Resist if you're interested in that. We are contact@resistmovement.org.uk. Cheers.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping very much to time. That's really good. Our next speaker is Kevin Bean.
Okay, thanks, Felicity. I think that comrades so far have demonstrated a lot that's wrong with the Labour Party, and I don't intend sort of going back over that ground. I think in the room and maybe on the panel, there'll be a certain number of sort of common elements in the analysis. But I want to go for a couple of areas of difference and respond to the question, is Labour dead? Well, it's not quite dead, and it's certainly in a weak position. But I think to understand the nature of the death of Labour, we need to understand the nature of the organism. I'm not a biologist, but I'm given to understand that there are certain organisms which have the appearance of death, often lasting for several years, and then they revive again. Now, my argument here is that the nature of Labour as an organism is very similar to the point that Dave made in the last session, that it's a bourgeois workers' party. Now, that is not just a phrase, it's a definition that Lenin put forward when Marxists in Britain were forming a communist party in the very early 1920s. And that, again, is not just a swear word. It's not just saying that we don't like Keir Starmer because he's posh. and that we like lots of trade unionists because they're working class. It is, I think, an accurate description of a party that draws the mass of its voting support and its political support from the organised working class in the trade unions. And as Roger described its history, it was formed as a representation group for the trade unions. But it also contained, in that period, explicitly and avowedly socialist elements as well. But what it also had, and this is both in the form of the trade union leadership, and I would say in the MPs, many of whom were reformist socialists or indeed lib labs, it also contained a thoroughly bourgeois element. And as Labour developed, it became really an essential part of the capitalist political system, loyal to the constitutional order, supporting the empire, supporting imperialism. In the First World War, Labour leaders lined up to join the cabinet. Some stayed outside. So the point I'm making about the history of the party is it always has this contradictory feature, bourgeois workers' party. And that, as I say, is not just a sort of swear word. It's an accurate definition of the role of labour leaders, trade union leaders, the labour bureaucracy, which is an integral part of the capitalist system. In particular, it sees its job as bargaining with the ruling class, gaining concessions for the working class. So is that party now irrevocably split, broken? Does it or not exist? Now, the two comrades so far have suggested that it is, and in fact we're now in a qualitatively different period. And my argument is that although we're in a period of serious crisis, and the comrades have outlined it, I think we would all agree with it, there's, not a great deal of difference there. Whether that crisis has those political effects that they describe, I think is open for question, and is in fact the significant question. Because we've all, those of us who've been on the left of the Labour Party have all expected and all hoped that there would be the type of split, the type of rupture that Roger describes. We've all argued for those sorts of policies. And I think what we have to consider is what is different now, and what is particularly different about the dynamics of that relationship. Because the British working class does still regard Labour as their party. We know what will happen in the next general election, that people will turn out in their droves to vote for Labour. They will have an overwhelmingly anti-Tory approach, and they will back Labour as the least worst. How many times have comrades said, well, any Labour government is better than a Tory government? So I think the question we have to go on is to look at that dynamic and that relationship, and in particular how we are going to break that bourgeois element. Now, my argument is not that we see the Labour Party as a party that we can transform. It's not like that glass of water that we can pour content into. Because, as we've seen, the Labour Party is far too valuable as a second 11 for the British capitalist class to leave it alone. If they had regarded it as harmless, then they would have allowed Corbyn to stay there. So they saw Corbyn as a threat. More importantly, as Corbyn often reminded us, although he didn't remind us often enough, and he certainly didn't remind us that many of the people he was cautioning against were actually inside the party, they're afraid of you. They're afraid of the power of the working class. They're afraid of the potential of the Labour Party. So we have this contradiction, and the nature of it, I think, is reflected through the nature of the type of left movements that emerge in the Labour Party. And my argument is that historically, those movements, even the very best of them, Roger outlined numerous movements, the very best of those movements are still, I think, trapped in Labourism. They're still trapped in an ideology which is not socialist, which does not call for a decisive break with capitalism, that in many ways sees socialist advance through the election of Labour governments, often through incremental stages in its most right-wing form. What it doesn't argue for, I think, is for a distinctively new working class party. Now, I'm in favour of that type of party, but I'm not in favour of a new Labour Party. I'm not in favour of a new party of Labour. I'm in favour of a Marxist party with an explicitly Marxist programme. I'm also in favour of the refoundation or the reforging of the Labour Party, because I think that the process of creating both a Marxist party in Britain and indeed of developing Marxist politics cannot ignore the Labour Party. But it's not through seeing the Labour Party as it is, it's not through seeing the Labour Party as some sort of instrument that can be readily used. It's to see it as a battleground and to see the struggle for Marxist politics taking place in the context of reforming the Labour Party as a united front, as a front of all working class and socialist organisations. In other words, going back to its original formation, again, the comrades on this table will know that there were socialist groups who were affiliated to the Labour Party. The most left-wing of them, the Social Democratic Federation, which often has a rather sort of dubious record, but was avowedly committed to Marxism, and it was seen as an important part of that. Likewise with the ILP, which although it had an ethical and often a fairly moralistic tone, also contained within it people who were explicitly Marxist. And of course, in the period up to 1918, when Labour was still a federation, parties like the British Socialist Party, which went on to become a founding element in the Communist Party, also had that relationship. And indeed, again, comrades will be very well aware that in the 1920s, the battle for communist affiliation, for Labour MPs who also were communists, or communists who had got the sort of approval of local Labour parties, that's the sort of relationship that I want. Now, that is not the same argument of saying that we are going to transform the Labour Party by simply joining it en bloc. We need, overtly Marxist politics to act as a pole of attraction for that left, and simply to call for a new Labour Party to, in a sense, recreate and redevelop the same sort of errors that the Labour left have committed really over a century. And as a comrade who's been around the Labour Party for a number of years, I understand what the strategy is. I understand what comrades have been trying to do, but I don't think that it is that we can, for example, arrive at any sort of Marxist or genuinely revolutionary and left politics in Britain without understanding the nature of the Labour Party. I think if comrades don't accept that, whether they remain inside the Labour Party or not, then they will simply go the way of the groups that Roger has described. The British working class still has that relationship with the Labour Party. It, above all, still has that relationship with Labourism. And our task, and I think all of the comrades on this table would agree with that, is to break with Labourism, is to break with reformism. And that, I think, is our task, and that requires explicitly Marxist politics and a Marxist programme. It doesn't mean abandoning the Labour Party. It means recognising the reality of the Labour Party, but addressing the nature of that reality and confronting it as a bourgeois workers' party. So those are my contributions, but there's plenty to discuss both in this session and in the next session. And also, comrades, plenty to read on the bookstall at the back as well.
You kept the time very well. And thank you, Kevin, and thank you to Kevin for keeping to time. Our next speaker is Dave Nellist, and you also have 15 minutes, Dave. That might be better, I don't know.
That was better than I thought. I thought they had 12. Okay, I'm an entrist. I'm an entrist from the 7 p.m. meeting who's been transplanted into the 4:30 whatever meeting because of a train I've got to get later on tonight and get back home for a COVID and flu jab. My contribution is as National Chair of the Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition and a member of the Socialist Party. It will overlap a lot of the points that comrades have already made, but hopefully there's a little bit that is distinctive that can add into the discussion that we're going to have. I think the defining moment of the last few months has been the sharp rise in industrial militancy that's taken place in Britain. When the CWU a couple of days ago announced 19 days of national industrial action, and that on this Saturday, October the 1st, that would coincide with all the rail unions coming out, as well as the dockers in Felixstowe and here in Liverpool as well. Or when my union Unite, in the first 12 months of Sharon's leadership as General Secretary, has secured £150 million of additional pay for 60,000 members in 360 individual successful disputes. That is different to where we were a year or two ago. Now, I think more can be achieved, particularly through better and more extended coordination of industrial action, and that's going to come up again at the rearranged TUC Congress in 3 weeks' time. And I think that at least we ought to be looking back to 2011, when 28 unions went into a room at the TUC Congress and came out with the 30th of November as a coordinated day on pensions, which resulted in 750,000 people marching through London, and one of the biggest coordinated strike actions since 1926. And I think we need something of that scale again in the immediate future on the question of the cost of living. But vital though those actions are, and even if escalated to even more general strike action, whether it's on the issue of pay or if this new Truss government comes up with its promises of further anti-trade union laws, it doesn't address the wider social issues for the income of those who don't have economic power, like pensioners and people on benefits, or for the issues of housing, or for the issues of the National Health Service. For those things, we need a political struggle for socialist policies. And to coordinate and prioritise that struggle, I think we need a national party with a mass membership that fights in the interests of the working class. Now, that was a development that was possible when Jed got elected in September 2015 as leader of the Labour Party. That period's over. Jeremy and his supporters have been defeated. He got elected in September 2016 with 168,000 individual member votes. Momentum slate for the NEC in 2020 got 62,000 votes. Momentum slate in this week's NEC elections got 22,000 votes. 200,000 people, like Lodgers said, have left the Labour Party. Even the best socialist campaign group MPs at the moment are like prisoners behind a cage who occasionally smuggle a note through the door, the bars, saying it's bloody horrible in here, you know, it really, really, with not much more effect. And the Stop the War letter, and 2 hours later everybody withdrawing their signatures, was the example of that. The rules for the next leadership election will prevent the accident of Jeremy getting on the ballot paper happening again. And this week's conference has shown the success of the followers of my former roommate, Tony Blair, in creating a party which is a safe pair of hands for business interests. In fact, if you read Keir's speech, he makes the point that he doesn't just want to be pro-business, he wants to be the partner of business going forward. And Labour now will limit its aspirations to what the market says can be afforded. It will make the difficult decisions of sound money, of balanced budgets and all the other buzzwords that came out yesterday afternoon, the effect of which will be that it will acquiesce in the continuation, for example, of food banks and other charities doing the jobs that local authorities ought to be doing, because they're not prepared to fight for the restoration of the £15 billion that's been taken off local authorities in the last 12 years. And the logic of that is that when balanced budgets have to be made, they will attack the terms and conditions of their own workers, like Unite members in Coventry or Calderdale or Newham. We had a 7-month strike in Coventry where the Labour Council has so far spent £6 million in hiring strike-breaking drivers in order to try and defeat a strike, which I'm glad to say they failed in doing so. But anyway, Labour is not the vehicle that can deliver the socialist change that I'm fairly sure unites all of us here this afternoon, certainly not within its current structures and rules, and so we need a new party. We need one, in my view, which is firmly rooted in the organisations and the communities of the working class. Now, I accept Roger's point that none of the existing socialist parties or alliances or coalitions have got the specific weight within politics to make that leap forward in the short term. What we need, in my view, is unions like the RMT and the Bakers, who are outside the Labour Party, to persuade those who are moving away from a central role within the Labour Party, like my union Unite and others, to at least come to a conference at which the Labour left and those socialist groups and those community campaigners who are fighting against cuts and so on could come together and start the debate about how do we build an independent political alternative. Bob Crow did that twice in 2009. He hosted in London 2 conferences about the crisis of the political representation of the working class. Jeremy spoke at one of them. John MacDonald spoke at another. I spoke at one, but we had other speakers from different trends within this debate. And we could discuss then not just the solidarity with strikes, not just the single issue demands on pay, energy bills, food poverty, housing taxation, which 500,000 people in the past 3 weeks have signed up saying those are priorities that need to be addressed. But how we actually challenge the existing pro-market establishment parties, including at the ballot box. And that's the second half of what I want to say. Now, I don't think we'll get to January 2025, which is the last possible date for general election. There's a series of overlapping crises that could topple the Tory government. But at the moment, whatever the result of that election, either by a change of government or some form of minority government or a combination of parties, the rich are still going to have their position within society protected, and working people are going to pay not just for the decade of austerity, which we're still paying for, or the pandemic, which we're starting to pay for, but now the next generalised recession, which is on its way. And Keir Starmer's speech at the whole of the content of it at the Labour Party conference was about repositioning the Labour Party, the expulsion of individuals and groups. According to The Economist last week, Rachel Reeves has had 250 meetings with chief executives of the largest firms in this country as a pro-business party. Even that announcement about a public sector energy competitor, I listened to the Radio 4 and people were coming out of the conference saying, we're going to renationalise energy. 3 minutes later, Ed Miliband's on that programme saying, no, this is a competitor. We're leaving the big six in their There is nothing that's going to fundamentally change the future of working people. No renationalisation of mail or of water or of transport or of the NHS. Even Rachel Reeves' reimposition of the 45% tax rate, which she said would raise 2 billion, she says that would employ about 15,000 people extra in the NHS. The NHS is 142,000 vacancies. Social care has 160,000 vacancies. That's nearly 1/3 people short in delivering two of the most essential parts of the welfare state. And we're not going to get that whilst we have a capitalist system and the two main parties playing kowtow to that system. So the best thing would be a conference of unions to say we need a new direction. There is another possibility. Jed's not going to be able to stand in Islington as a Labour candidate. That's absolutely clear. If he declared no, and he said to those other Socialist campaign group MPs who are under threat, including those here on Merseyside who are under a threat, we're going to declare now that we're going to stand, and we're going to stand on the 2017 and 2019 election manifestos. I reckon a fair proportion, certainly tens of thousands of those 500,000 who signed up to Enough and Is Enough over the last 3 weeks, would get involved in that sort of project to challenge on the manifestos that brought many of them into membership of the Labour Party in the first time. So there could be a challenge, but we can't wait and hope that it's going to happen. So what Tusk has done is that we have written to the 21 organisations, socialists, ex-Labour, such as Liverpool Community Independents, social movements such as Enough is Enough, to try and open discussions on a common manifesto that we could agree with, not a one which limits what you can do, but underpins the things that we agree on, and to say that given we believe that even if there was a change of government, there's not going to be a fundamental change in the system that we need, that we need to challenge in the elections that are coming up. Council elections next May. I haven't got time, I'm looking at my clock now, to go into the horrendous position that local authorities are in this year before they even start in October, November doing the pre-budget consultations on next year's budgets. But we can't wait. So one of the key tasks in any election, but particularly a general election, is visibility. You need to access what's called the fair media coverage rules to have 15% of the candidates standing in a general election. That's 98 in the UK. Now, we achieved that in 2015. We were the sixth biggest party in the country in 2015. We stood 135 candidates and 619 council candidates. We had a 5-minute TV broadcast. I was largely the author of it. I'm very proud of it. It's still on YouTube. I'd like you all to go have a look at it because it does show how you can bring people together and raise all the issues that working people need raising. But we need to have a target of 100 socialist, trade unionist, community campaigning candidates under a common name and a common minimum programme standing in the election. That's going to cost £60,000 to get that visibility as a challenge from the left in the general election as it comes up. Now, we're prepared to do that as Tusk. We'd invite others to consider joining us in that. I know it's not the best name. When we started this under Bob Crow in January 2010 and you went onto Google and you put in Tusk, you got the Taunton Ukulele Strummers Club because they were the most prominent users of the initials. And if you think Tusk is bad, by the way, Mélenchon in France managed 21%, I think it was, in the elections 3 months ago with NUPES, which is the New Social and Ecological People's Union. The name isn't the important thing. But having said that, going into an election saying you're a trade unionist and you're a socialist is not the worst thing to be doing when more people are joining trade unions and more people are taking challenges on the question of pay. So to finish, the economy is stagnating, inflation at 10%. Danny Blanchpower, former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Committee, reckon we're heading to a worse recession than we had in the 1930s. And just as the financial crash of 14 years ago, 2008, effectively produced the Arab Spring, Bernie Sanders in America, Podemos in Spain, Syriza in Greece, Jeremy in Britain, the coming recession will cause people to question the existing economic and political setup. What we can't guarantee is that they will go as they did in the last decade, largely to the left. If you look at Sweden, you look at Italy, you look at Hungary, you'll realise that there are siren voices from the populist right aiming at the working class to try and move them in the direction, in the case of Sweden, of effectively neo-Nazism. So we haven't got unlimited time. And as the chair can see, I'm literally on my last page. I just want to make this final main point. 50 years ago, when I was growing up, I ain't going to do the two-room worker speech of Keir Starmer, but it ain't that dissimilar. My dad was the fitter in the steelworks for 43 years. But 50 years ago when I was growing up, you could buy a house with 1 to 1.5 years of your wage. Only one skilled wage was necessary to get by within a household. Now you need 2 wages. Houses are 8 to 10 times the average wage. Then trade unions were more numerically stronger and more combative. And 43 years of Thatcher's policies, followed by both the establishment parties, has meant that the share of wealth that working people got in the mid-1970s, when this was one of the more equal countries on the planet, because 65% of every pound we made came back to working people in wages, has now fallen to 50% of GDP. That's about £300 billion a year that has trickled up to the rich because of neoliberalism over the last 40 years. Whatever we form, however we get to a new political alternative, we have to tackle the disparity of that inequality in society and make a life that's worth living for working class people and their families. And I don't think you can do that remaining in the confines of a market system based on profit before people. What we need is a socialist society planned to provide a decent life for working people. Labour ain't going to deliver that. Somehow we've got to build something new.
So thank you very much to Dave. I'm going to ask people for their contributions, but can I particularly say that we would welcome contributions from the younger people in the audience. It's important that, you know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you are very welcome to make a contribution if you want to. Right. Sorry. Can't see who's next to Mary. Who is it? Irene. Irene.
She is one of the younger ones in the audience.
Irene. They haven't put their hands up yet.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate everything that's been said, and I agree in part with everybody, not totally with everybody. I do like the idea of independent standing as a representative voice, maybe not under the labels, but that's a different discussion, but by a common manifesto, because we need to have some voice. And my issue that maybe isn't appropriate for discussion now, but maybe could be flagged up, is fine talking about parties, fine talking about organisations. Earlier today we heard how long and how many years preparation it takes to build up an effective organisation, not just a party. We know that the British labour movement started in 1750 in some form or other, and fragmented all the way through. I would like to see how we organise communities in parallel with the parties, and as consumers. We are merely consumers now. We have no democratic rights. We are merely consumers to be exploited. So we could start starving those global corporations of their oxygen money. We don't have to buy from them. We don't have to use Amazon, which is so bad and it's the first thing you hit. Never use Amazon. We can boycott stores. We can use our money to make a difference collectively. And that's all they're interested in. So that's something we don't talk about, our latent consumer power, and how we get into the communities and start discussing with them all those issues that they're facing, because we are in a different context and they aren't going to stop. And the catastrophic problems that as a nation, as people we are facing, have never been seen to that destructive extent since the war. That's it, really.
Thank you very much. I am going to ask that people, given the time we've got, I'm going to ask that people try and keep their contributions to no more than 4 minutes. Tina?
Thank you, comrades. I think it was a really good discussion, actually, and it's a really important discussion. I'm really glad we're having it, because it's overdue, I think, after the defeat of Corbyn. I think we really have to get our heads around what we're doing. I was going to say, though, I mean, is the Labour Party dead or not? Is a tricky question. It's a bit like Schrödinger's cat. I mean, we've had 30,000 people voted for Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi in the recent NEC elections. That's still more people inside, active socialists inside the Labour Party than in the groups outside of the Labour Party. That is a problem, I think, for us if we say the Labour Party is dead, that reality. Also, this conference now, we've actually seen a lot of votes quite close, 60-40, the right 60%, the left 40. And that, considering how difficult it is to become a delegate to conference at the moment, and how many, and not get expelled on the evening before, once you've gone through all that, the rigged selection processes locally, etc. So there is still something going on. So I think it's a bit early to say it's dead. I should say, though, I think the Labour Party will not bring socialism. It cannot bring socialism. That's not its task. That's not what it's there for. And I think that is a problem that many on the Labour left gave that impression, and many believe that. But it's a reflection. I think Kevin is quite right. It's a reflection of the class struggle. It's the left and the right, and we've seen it in the Corbyn years, how the ruling class used everything in its power to defeat Corbyn and the left, because they see it as a real danger, and the left gets organised in the Labour Party. And, it's a reflection of the class struggle, and you can't really run away from the class struggle. So as long as the unions are affiliated, and they are, that is an expression of the organised working class. I think as long as they do that, we have to at least have a strategy towards the Labour Party. I don't think all in, it's not a slogan you want to come out with. That's not serious, and especially it's because most of us here have been expelled anyway, so we can't go in. But we have to have an active engagement and a strategy of how we can break people from labourism. And I think one of the biggest problems is that much of the left really hasn't learned the lessons of why we were defeated in the Corbyn period, including, unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn and especially John McDonnell and people in the Socialist campaign group. But I think there are really important lessons. For a start, don't appease the right. It is a class struggle. They will come for us once we're in a strong position. They will try to defeat us. They will fight us. They will try to kill us if they can. And stand in solidarity with those who are being witch hunted, especially if it's witch hunted for obviously falsified and weaponized reasons like anti-Semitism witch hunt. And have a culture of open debate and embracing differences, because the working class is full of differences. So the John McDonnell idea of zero tolerance, to shut up people who've said something stupid or perhaps something slightly incorrect, or perhaps just said, I don't like Israel. That's, and to demand zero tolerance on that is the opposite of the kind of culture of free and open debate that we need, and what we're actually doing here. But also, chiefly, and I want to pick up on what Dave Nellist said then, is that we need to fight for the politics that we know are needed. For example, getting rid of Trident, getting rid of the monarchy. These are not things that we should just drop when we coming into a position where we can actually make a difference. And that's what I'm thinking. If we standing against the Labour Party, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. It depends on what program, doesn't it? It depends on what you're fighting for. Because we have movements like Enough is Enough, and there are hundreds of thousands of people sign up to it. I mean, you can't join it, it doesn't have a democratic structure, etc. But it's a defensive organization, and that's important. But we also need to get our head around what we're fighting for. What is socialism? What does the working class rule? What is Marxist politics the way forward? So a minimum program, when I hear minimum program, I always think like, you do the 15-hour wage, but the idea, what is our vision of a better world? How do we overcome capitalism? How can we build something better? I think these are issues that much of the left doesn't really address, and we really need to educate ourselves on these issues. Thanks.
Did you have your hand up? Yeah, do you want to come speak next? And then I'll take the young lady. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Alex Smith. I'm a member of the Socialist Party, and I'm also a delegate on the Liverpool Trade Union Council. I thought all the speakers were brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Brought a couple of young students down from Edgehill University. They've enjoyed it as well. So it's definitely worth driving down. Although I agreed with much of what all the speakers say, I do want to push back a little bit on one of the things Roger mentioned, where he referred to militants, now the Socialist Party, as an inconsequential sect. Quite frankly, although we are small, and that is a fact, we do have somewhat of an impact. And we're not very shy about talking about that, so I'll just do some of that very briefly now. Some of the comrades in here from Liverpool, I know myself and Neil Dunner, another Socialist Party comrade, in our Unite branch, we went through the City Council's accounts and drew up an alternative budget showing that it was possible for councillors to avoid cuts in the short term and wage a campaign, demanding that the Tory government refund those reserves used to defend working class people. We got that pushed right the way up through Unite. We did that. That went right the way up through Unite. And Socialist Party comrades, Dave might talk a bit more about it, they got it past the Unite policy conference, and that's not like an inconsequential thing, because we now know that Unite have drawn up a charter where basically Labour councillors who are in Unite have to agree to this charter, and inside that charter possibly could be included demands calling for no cuts budgets, the sort of things we push. And apparently so far not many of these Labour councillors have signed up to those charters. Okay, that's an impact we've had. So yeah, we are small, but a small cog can turn a big cog if you know what you're doing. And Dave also referred to the Coventry bin strike. Dave, maybe you'd like to talk about the impact the Socialist Party had there. Certainly wasn't inconsequential. Sure, we can discuss it more. So yeah, thank you, comrades.
Sorry, I don't know your name. Would you like to come and speak?
It's okay. I'm Ananya. I'm an international student, and I moved to UK for university and stuff. Now, I do not have the wealth of knowledge as most people here, but it's like every typical communist, I do not agree 100% with any other communist. That's like a stereotypical thing for all of us now. And British history with socialism and stuff, it's obviously a very new topic for me. My interaction, I'm an Indian by the way, my interaction with Britain has been that of colonialism and stuff. I am not that well aware of the labor movements here and stuff, but my relation to Britain is that of, a ex-colonizer that I'm still very angry about and probably will be the rest of my life. And my purpose, and it's like obviously my main concern is that everybody's living standards be improved, but my also one concern is that the centuries of fascism by Europe, it needs to go. It needs to be removed from the world. And we need to create a communist system that is led by people of color from the third world, from Asia, Africa, Central America, Latin America. And I feel like the main role of Western socialism is obviously to improve the living conditions, but also to stop their governments from, can I say curse words?
Yeah.
Okay. From fucking around with poor people and people of color everywhere. And obviously, I don't mean this in a patronizing way. All of us have a lot to do. But I think the most important responsibility of a white person is to stop their government from doing any more shit. Now, obviously, that's not easy. And I would also say, one thing is, I'm very new to communism. I haven't figured out shit at all. I'm still, dealing with stuff, doing it at my very slow pace. But one thing I've enjoyed is learning from history, especially learning from history of people of color, from Asian revolutions, Africa. Obviously, too many of them end with them getting murdered, sadly. But it's like that anger is good because we know what capitalism, which is based in white supremacy, took from us, what it took from Africa, Asia, and all these colonies. When they murdered Thomas Sankara, what they took from that country. Every time they murder a revolutionary, they destroy people's life, and that anger is needed. They destroy everyone's lives, including the people living in the imperial core. And I think that anger should always be there. Obviously, it's tiring being angry, but it's like, you need to have that anger to get that willpower and hope to fight for a better world. And one more particular thing I would like to share is that I've not studied about anything in enough detail to say I'm an expert at it, so take it with that. But it's like, while I obviously do not like first past the post system, I do have mixed feelings about going in elections, but it's also, I have to acknowledge the fact, standing in elections and going through, traditional ways of power, as well as finding other ways to power, has done a lot to improve conditions, has got many victories. But I would also like to sort of emphasize, it's mostly inspired from Black Panther Party, that there should be some form of direct connection with people, not just in form of protests and stuff, but I would be organizing food for homeless people, organizing safety or just making sexual health more accessible for our teenagers, or making mental health more accessible, or just trying to help them navigate NHS, which in its own would be a massive service because it's such a mess. Just any form of direct help we can do to the community, we should do that instead of just going beyond just focusing on elections or just peaceful protest or just creating awareness. We need to form a connection with people like the yeah, they did. They built a connection by trying to provide for the people as much as they can. I'm not going to advocate for any violent stuff for legal reasons, but I'm saying to whatever best extent we can, we need to connect with everyone around us. And that's why we need to build our community back that has been stolen from us. We need to unlearn all that stuff of driving in cars alone, not giving a shit about someone else, connect with random people, give a fuck about their lives, give a fuck about their health, see what the fuck you can do about it, contribute however you can. Sorry, that's a lot of cussing. And it's we're not gonna change the system overnight at all, but it's to the best extent you have, just do it, whatever you can, and keep doing it. And it's I think part of being a socialist communist is that we have this really strong love for the world and for every human being. And it's sometimes it's not that visible, but I feel we should make our love for everyone more visible. Just show that this love, that everybody deserves a decent fucking life on earth, that corporations do not get to destroy our earth just so they can, do whatever dumb shit they want to do and call it innovation. This love needs to be emphasized more. It's we are batshit crazy leftists because we love each other, we love the people, and we want everyone to live a decent, dignified life.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very glad that I invited you to speak. I think Richard.
Okay.
Follow that, Richard.
Yeah. I get the job of following that. Yeah. Thanks very much. So the discussion is the Labour Party dead? The answer is no. It's just had a conference. It's ahead in the polls. The other question is the Labour Party dead as a vehicle for the left to take over and turn into a party that can take political power and carry out the socialist transformation of society? And the answer to that is an obvious yes, for all of the reasons that everybody, even Kevin, on the platform have had to concede. We can't take over the Labour Party in the current situation. And if there's another accident, and it was an accident, such as happened in 2015, then what are we going to do? Are we going to wait 50 years for it? My son's 9. What are we going to do? We're going to wait 50 years? Climate change, war, poverty, unable to, no. On the other hand, and there is another hand, everybody here is aware. Roger said it, it's very clear, with the greatest respect to the Socialist Party and Resist and all of the other groups and Tusk, the other method, apart from trying to take over the Labour Party, that the British left has been using for all of our lives, and actually right the way back to the year dot, has been wrong. Because it's not just take over the Labour Party that hasn't worked. The other thing, let's be honest, that doesn't work is the set up the sect, give it a name, give it a logo, hand out membership cards, recruit ones and twos, and maybe when my son is my age and he's 50 years younger than me, they'll have recruited another 500 or 600 people. Maybe they'll have got some councillors somewhere, right? Maybe they'll have saved a deposit in a council, in a parliamentary election. It doesn't work. But what we do know is that mass working class parties can be built. It happened in Germany in the time of Marx and Engels and Bebel and Liebknecht. Right? They built a mass working class party, and they built it on a coherent and consistent socialist policy. And the Russian Social Democrats did it as well, didn't they? They managed to build a party that managed to achieve really quite a lot in terms of establishing the basis for how the working class can take political power. And how did they do it? They did it neither by a desperate and hopeless attempt to capture some sort of entrenched bourgeois institution, nor, and they said it explicitly, nor did they set up sects. Marx, Engels, Lenin, they all said they didn't want to set up sects. They opposed sects. They hated sects. What did they do? They went among the fighting detachments of the working class, which included trade union organisations, some of which they had promoted themselves, political unions, which were both industrial and political, like the South Russian Workers' Union or the League of Struggle in St. Petersburg. They went amongst the sects, which they didn't think were illegitimate or ridiculous organisations, because they recognised that they had kept the flame burning in the years when there was no mass working class movement, and that therefore they play an absolutely fundamental role in keeping, so many of the people here, right, learnt their politics not in the academy, but in fantastic fighting sects, really, socialist propaganda societies, right? Excellent organisations, but they need to come together. And our role needs to be to create a credible process, not with a charismatic leader that says it's over here, or an existing group that says we're better than the other groups, but a credible process co-designed by the participants, where we actually start to say, okay, what would a party look like in Britain today? How could we work together? What process would we use to discuss and debate its politics? Tina was talking about the politics. Let's sort that out in the process of convening the party, not in advance, as if some sort of doctrinal unity is a stage we have to go through before we can start the process of creating an actual vehicle to take political power. So, we don't have to try to take over the Labour Party. We don't have to go down the hopeless path of the sect with its 25 votes for socialism. What we can do is create a credible process, go to the Enough is Enough groups, and they're not just all signed up on the internet. There's a group in Leicester. There's a group, as a Don't Pay group in Brighton. There's a People's Assembly group in Cardiff. There's a People's Assembly group in Nottingham. And they're bringing the different people together. Go to them, go to the sects, go to the unions, go to Acorn, which continues to grow, and patiently advocate that we need to co-create a credible process, a project for the formation of a party. And we need to organise in order to do that, don't we? So, don't know what the, exactly how that's going to be done, but it seems to me that that has to be the path that we take.
Sorry, I'm really pushed for time now, so can we restrict the time people speak? I don't know your name, sorry, comrade there. Yeah, you. Sorry, Tony, I should have recognised you.
Right, thank you. My name is Tony Greenstein, and for my privilege, I was the first Jewish person to be expelled from the Labour Party, but not the last. I think it was quite interesting, the speaker before last, the woman from India, because she reminded us of the legacy of British imperialism and British colonialism, because it was Lenin who ascribed the conservatism of the British Labour movement to the crumbs from the table of imperialism. And we should bear that in mind today. There are reasons why the British working class has been the most depoliticised of all. And when we look at the Labour Party conference, which has just gone, they sang the national anthem at the beginning, and they had a big butcher's apron, they call it, hanging behind it. And that is the politics of the Labour Party today. And so I think the question we're asked about the Labour Party, is the Labour Party dead, is the wrong question. It should really ask, is the Labour Party dead for socialism? And then I think the answer to that is yes, it clearly is dead for socialism. We saw with the Corbyn movement, it came together, vast disparate forces, but it also very quickly succumbed to the attacks upon it. There was no coordinated response, least of all from Corbyn. And that should tell us that the Labour left is unfit to fight, and it's more true now when you saw Momentum refuse to support Naomi Wimborne-Idrisi. We should also address, I think, the historical legacy we find ourselves in. We had a trip down memory lane today, 47 councillors. That was 37 years ago. We haven't had a significant industrial strike since that, or a challenge. We're in a massive social crisis today. We are having the beginnings of a strike action, but I have to say, the trade union leaderships we have today are piss poor weak. Not only Mick Lynch, but Sharon Graham last week said that she supports Keir Starmer as the future political leader. That is the weakness of the trade union leaderships today. And I think the crucial demand is a demand for the trade unions to break the link with the Labour Party. As long as they are tied now to the Labour Party, they are actually tied to British capitalism. And that is a real problem. So we have to actually use our brains and think, where are we today? We have to ask what strategy we pursue. We can win struggles, but they will be that much more difficult. We haven't won anything since the poll tax. We've had the trade union leadership, the trade union membership is half of what it was under Thatcher. We're facing trade union laws which will effectively abolish the right to strike. All of these things matter, and it's not just in Britain. Dave said about the victories of the far right in Sweden and Italy and Hungary. And not only there, we have neo-Nazi parties dotted around Europe in the parliaments. So we are facing a very significant crisis, the death of social democracy in Europe. Where's the French Socialist Party? 1.7% of the vote. So yes, I do think the days of the sects are over. The SWP, the SP, etc. have created very little. We do need to come together, and we do actually need to build a new socialist party. Whether we can do it is an open question. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you. Tina needs to make an admin announcement.
This is for the comrades who are watching the live stream. Hello. If you're waiting for the Big Lie film to be shown, it's actually on our website. If you go to the Future of the Left live stream, it's embedded in our website. There were some technical problems with showing it on live stream, but just as well, because this meeting is overrunning. So you can watch it at least today, or probably also tomorrow. It'll be on our website, and you can watch it there. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. I see 3 more people. I think that's going to be our lot. So, comrade first. Can you stand?
Okay. Yeah, Stan Keeble, Labour Party Marxist. I want to say, I mean, the conflict over whether to fight in the Labour Party or outside, whether to stay in the Labour Party or to go, you know, to leave it and save yourself some trouble, is understandable, but it's really a secondary question. The problem we've got is that the revolutionary left, the socialist left, is divided into lots of different groups, organised separately against each other with different projects, and we need to have one communist party. And that's the key question. Our attitude to the Labour Party and how we handle that is actually a secondary question. It's a tactical question. We need to get rid of capitalism. We need to create working class rule in this country, in Europe, in the world, in order to get rid of capitalism, and then we can go about the jobs that need doing, like getting rid of war. We can't do that without defeating capitalism as a whole. The climate change, we can't tackle that without defeating capitalism as a whole. So we need to raise our sights in that sense. And the question about how to do it, how to make a communist party, well, comrades want a mass socialist party, don't they? That's what we'd love to do. If you start with mass, you won't get the right programme. You know, it's a question of whether you start with principle or whether you imagine you could start with mass. Let's find a load of people that are fed up with something. They may be fed up with Starmer and fed up with right-wing Labour, but they're certainly not united about what should be done about it. So we need a principled programme around which we can unite Marxists. Our problem is that the Marxists are not united. They're divided into separate sects. So we had the SWP and the Socialist Party in England and Wales, what we call SPEW, sorry. It's a bad joke, Dave. No, well, the Socialist Party in England and Wales, yeah. And so those organisations are asking people to disaffiliate, as some of the speakers here are asking comrades and trade unions to disaffiliate. When Corbyn was in leadership and when we had a chance of changing Labour, we had those organisations, for example, outside the Labour Party, trying to persuade people to leave and trying to persuade unions to leave. If the RMT had been persuaded in its conference recently to actually join, you know, while Corbyn was still in the leadership, we could have changed things, we could have had a better chance. I don't think the Corbyn government would have been allowed by the capitalist class to actually do the business. You know, they would have wrecked the economy rather than let any kind of socialist government develop, because we haven't got a strong movement. We have to build a strong workers' movement when we've already got the revolutionaries and socialists organised properly into a communist party. Then we can stand a chance. Otherwise, it's a hopeless striving. Don't start with the mass, start with the principle.
Dave?
Thanks. I think it's been a great debate, and you know, some really good points have been made. I wanted to pick up on the point of the trade unions setting up organisations like Enough is Enough, the TUC setting up We Demand Better, Unite the Union has set up Unite for the Workers' Economy. There are these kind of organisations which are great because they bring together workers in struggle who are in trade unions, workers who are not in trade unions, students, people who are retired, people who are disabled, are able to come together under the banner of these organisations and debate the issues that they face. And the big issues that they're facing and the conclusions that they're coming to is that the society that we live in, the political system that we've got is rigged, it's corrupt, It's geared up to make the billionaires rich and to exploit us. And the answer to these problems is to take back some control, take control of water, energy. So why are we coming to them conclusions? Well, the water companies are polluting our rivers, our lakes, our coastline, and the shareholders are getting billions and billions of pounds. The workers are being sent into private contractors, robbed of their pensions, exploited. Then you've got energy. The energy companies are ripping us off. They're mining our oil and gas off our own coastline and then saying, oh, we've got to charge you international prices because there's a crisis in Ukraine, so we're going to charge you 5 times the price. So we're realising through these organisations, enough is enough, that there are political solutions to all of these problems that we face, and but ultimately, what are these organisations going to do when we get to the ballot box? What do we do then? Because when we go into the ballot box, all the mainstream political parties are committed to the private ownership of our utilities, committed to the anti-trade union laws that stop us from organising and struggling, and committed to all of the neoliberalism that is robbing us of our wealth and of our environment and our living standards. So I think what we're seeing in Enough is Enough and We Demand Better and Unite for Workers' Economy is a seed that's planted for a new Workers' Party. And I hope that's what develops, because the Labour Party, if they win the next election, I hope they do, because we all want to see the back of the Tories, we all want to see the back of this madness. But the trouble is we won't see the back of it if Labour come in, because it'll be the second 11, it'll be a substitute Tory party who'll come in, pick up where the Tories left off. Very, very little will change. There'll be a little bit of tinkering around the edges. So it won't be a rerun of New Labour under Blair when they came into a period of relative stability and growth. This Labour Party will come into a very deep period of crisis. They will fail to answer the questions they are faced with, and the working class will see very quickly that they have not got an ally in government, and then the question will be posed by the likes of Enough is Enough and We Demand Better and Unite for the Workers' Economy. Well, what next? What do we do about it? And a new Workers' Party must be the answer to that question, and it will be easy for the trade unions to use their enormous wealth, their enormous resources, money, structural organisations, organisational facilities, to bring together all of the organisations of the left. That was expressed when Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party. Hundreds of thousands of people joined the Labour Party. If the trade unions come together, and I'm sure that will be the top of the agenda after the next general election, that there will be a mass movement in favour of a new Workers' Party, because this Labour Party will fail to meet the challenges that it faces. So onward and upward. If that's wrong, and just to finish on this, Dave Nellist made the point that if the left fail to rise up and answer these questions, then it will be the right who fills the vacuum. It will be exactly what's happened in Italy. The far right will take over and they will steal the march on us. It's vitally important that we campaign within our unions on the issues of public ownership, of workers' rights, of democracy, democratic accountability, and for a new Workers' Party that represents our interests.
I think our last... yes, can you come? Would you apologise for me for a minute? Excuse me.
I'm just taking the chair for a second.
Yeah, you're right. I'm actually from Bristol, but I just wanted to speak after such an inspiring sort of speech from my comrade over here. But yeah, no. But I'm actually, so my name's Finn, I'm part of the Young Communist League of Britain, which is the youth wing of the Communist Party of Britain. And basically I just wanted to say, like, a lot of people are usually shocked when I tell them that, because, you know, the Communist Party, they think of, you know, like Stalinist Russia, you know, like Maoist China. They jump straight to like the things that we've been told in school, right? But what attracted me to the Young Communist League, and by extension at the Communist Party, is because I think, you know, speaking as a young person, so many of us are looking for radical solutions. We've been shut out of mainstream politics, you know, for years and years now. Like, only now are we really seeing, like, young people breaking through with the climate movement, with, you know, trans rights and LGBT rights, and in other aspects of stuff that's already been established, like the struggle for Palestinian liberation, you know, the struggle against, well, war and conflict in general, you know. But I just wanted to build on what two of the comrades before were saying, actually, about direct action. And I wanted to urge, you know, whatever political party, leaning, organisation, you know, social movements that you're part of, is that we, as the left, need to look beyond the ballot box. And that's because we can't wait 5, 10, 15 years for another Jeremy Corbyn to come around. And you know, particularly for young people, Jeremy Corbyn was such an inspiration for many of us. I mean, for the first time in our lives, you know, you saw that like thousands and thousands of young people were attracted to the Labour Party, and something that monumental hadn't been seen, you know, such an influx of young people into a political movement for, you know, since sort of protests against the Vietnam War and stuff like that, you know. So that was something monumentous, but now we've been shut out of the Labour Party, you know, and sort of young left-wing radical ideas, whether it's about the climate, whether it's about Palestinian rights, etc., we're not able to have this discourse anymore, because the two options we have is we either enter left-wing politics on the fringe through groups like the SWP, through the Socialist Party, through other left-wing fringe parties, which might agree with us ideologically, but simply don't have the size and numbers to fight back in a big capacity. Or we go through the Labour Party, where we're already shut out of the democratic institutions, expelled from it. I mean, Young Labour's Twitter account was shut down over dissent over Labour's foreign policy. So, and also the budget was cut as well. So Young Labour's only been allocated this year about £2,000, because I spoke to Young Labour members on the Young Labour National Committee. And that's a budget that's gone from, you know, years before, like in the tens of thousands to literally £2,000. So going back to my main point anyway, just to close up, is we need to look towards direct action, because the Young Communist League, particularly in Scotland, but also in England as well, have been out there running food banks for working class communities. In Glasgow, the Young Communist League branch secretary stood up in Glasgow Council to take on the current council and draw attention to the rampant drug issues amongst working class communities in Glasgow at the moment. And you will not see a Scottish Labour councillor doing that. You will not see an SNP councillor doing that, because they're too afraid and too hyper-focused on winning the next election, on winning a seat in their council or in Parliament, that they will not touch the real issues in society that are affecting working class communities. And it is left to us to pick up the pieces. So essentially, I guess what I'm urging is look towards direct action. This isn't me trying to recruit people for the YCL or the CP, but take inspiration from that. And I particularly urge, you know, new parties and already existing parties to explore that as well, because we cannot wait decades and decades. We have the climate crisis. We have issues that face working class people here and now and around the rest of the world that we need to address collectively.
Before we go into the summing up, Ian, do you want to say anything? We've got a General Secretary of the Union here. Do we want to say anything? National President, sorry. Sorry. Sorry, should have left you being anonymous.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think it's been a really interesting debate. I think you know, the contributions from everybody, but I think Dave Nellis's point about the importance of bringing trade unions together to talk about the issue of the lack of opportunity for people to take part in politics is a really important one and a really valid one. I think there is an absolute dire need for our class to be represented in politics. I mean, the Labour Party, which is supposed to be that vehicle, quite clearly is not that vehicle. It's not representing the interests of working people. It represents the interests of the bosses. You know, it's positioned itself there. You know, when it makes decisions, as I was saying before, when it makes decisions not to support a £15 minimum wage, the repercussions of that are felt in our workplace, because those employers know that even if there was a change of government, that government would not make sure workers' wages were risen. You know, so they're quite comfortable with that. When they talk about abolishing, you know, 0 hours contracts, they're not actually talking about abolishing 0 hours contracts. What they're saying is they'll get rid of the bad ones. Well, actually, we need to get rid of all 0 hours contracts. I know a lot of people think that 0 hours contracts, you know, people like to be on them. It's because they've never had an alternative and they don't understand what an alternative looks like. When I left school, I had a contract of employment. I was still able to get the hours that I wanted. I didn't need to have no rights to achieve that. But the Labour Party isn't making that argument and explaining that to people. So from our point of view, the need for us to be represented in Parliament is essential. So like I say, you know, I think it's been an incredible debate. Love the contributions, obviously, fantastic, and I love the passion, and it's so important, because passion is important in politics. But we do need to recognise that we need to grow a movement. We have to have a movement that can build that change. I mean, you know, you go to anywhere and they say, oh, this is a Labour town. And they just vote because it's a Labour town, because that's how they were encouraged to vote, which makes it virtually impossible to change the political society that we live in, because they feel not to vote Labour would be a betrayal. When actually, they're betraying themselves and the future generations by continuing that myth that by voting Labour, somehow their lives will be made better. What we need is to recognise Liverpool is not a Labour city. It's a socialist city. Wigan is not a Labour town. It's a socialist town. And what people in those places want is they want reform of politics so it serves their interests, so their families' lives improve, so they have decent homes, so they have the ability to pay their rent, so their wages rise so they can afford the food that they have to buy, to put it on the table without relying on universal credit or some other form of benefit, or even worse, going to a food bank. So it's an essential, an absolutely essential part of what we need to do as a class, as a people, is to recognise the education of the people we meet when we go and pick up. I got into trouble for this once, but I'll say it again. Right? When we go to the shops, you know, when we talk to the people in the checkouts, or when we're going around the shop, because it's no good talking to just ourselves. When you go on a bus and when you pick up your children from school and you talk to the other parents, because apparently I was calling for the political education of children to be, you know, based in Marxism by making that comment. But I did say political education was important, because I think it is, because it's a missing link, isn't it? It's always about kings and queens. It's never about what we've achieved. You know, the things that we've done and the things that we've created because we came together as a people. Our class is an amazing class for change when we understand that. And we have a right to a political voice and political representation. So thank you very much. I'll stay incognito at the back.
Right. Thank you, comrades. I'm conscious of the time, and we have to be out of this room by 1:45. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers to say a few things to wind up, and I'll do it in reverse. So Dave first, please.
All right.
Sorry.
I was still thinking there. Thanks very much, and thanks, I didn't say this at the beginning, but to the organisers for inviting me and giving me the chance to come up to Liverpool again, and for listening to today's discussion. It's been excellent. However, I must say, a little disappointed one or two of the latter contributions, you know, remarks about sex and people being unable to build and so on. Roger will correct me because he's written a lot about this, but my memory is that the Bolsheviks were 3,000 strong in February 1917 and 100 times bigger in October 1917. So events can play a role in if ideas match up with necessity as to whether bodies and parties grow or not. The German social democracy in the mid-1920s had hundreds of newspapers, had thousands of full-timers. They were inspired by Karl Marx. Karl Marx had 9 people at his funeral. I mean, he was a complete write-off when he died in terms of being a significant political force. Syriza won the election in 2015 in Greece. Now, good debate to have about, kowtowing before the European Troika and so on. But in 2009, in the elections then, Syriza's vote was 4.8%. Tusk's average vote in the 2,000 candidates we have stood since 2010 has been 5%. I know we haven't won much. We've only had a few councillors in Coventry, in Southampton, in Leicester, working with people in Hull, working with people in Warrington. It hasn't changed the world. However, we still think it's a valid argument to put forward that if people with more clout in the movement that we have worked along a similar inclusive path of trying to bring together particularly trade unions, but also community and anti-cuts organisations, to stand together, we could achieve more than we've achieved so far. And when, by the way, Irene said right at the very beginning, agree with a common manifesto, not sure about a common name, we aren't talking about mergers. I mean, to create a new socialist party or a new mass left party, there will have to be mergers at some point, but we aren't at that stage that. We're talking about what do we do in the next election, and unfortunately the rules are, unless you have the same name, the Electoral Commission will not consider you to be the same group of people, and therefore you won't get the TV broadcast that we got in 2015. The point to finish on, because as I say, it's been an excellent discussion. I know others wish to sum up as well, is that you can start small, and if your ideas match what is needed, you can grow big. I still maintain the first meeting in England, at least, against the poll tax was held in Charlesmore Community Centre in Coventry, where there were 11 people, including me as the speaker. By April 1993, I won't do the whole of this story, I'm just doing the punchline, the number of adults who'd been taken through the courts in England and Wales for their inability or refusal to pay the poll tax was 25,016,263. 40% of the entire population, adult population of England and Wales. That came about because of a firm approach opposing cuts, building an inclusive organisation of 2,000 groups in towns and cities around the country, welding them together and giving a sense that you can beat the bastards. However we do it, that's what we've got to do. And the strongest organisations we could start to do that with are the trade unions and the community organisations that are fighting up and down the country at the moment. Thanks for your time tonight. Hope it was worthwhile.
Cheers. I was one of them. I had a CCJ against my name for years. Non-payment. Right. Let's have a look. So yeah, Tina had said about that we need to be aware that the number of votes that Naomi got, Wimborne-Idrissi, who stood for the NEC, and that there's lots of people still, left people still inside the party, and probably collectively more left people within the party, the Labour Party, than there are outside of the party. But I would ask the question, who is it that's in the party and what are they able to do within the party? If you're still in the Labour Party and you still think there's a route back for the Labour Party, I'd be questioning how astute are you as to what's actually happened. You know, I think the people that are outside, either they've been kicked out or they've seen that it's the end. They're the people that are turning up to these events and being realistic about what's happened and talking about what we do next. So within Resist, I mean, and they will be welcome to join us, but I think that The kind of movement that we need needs to be 1,000,000 miles away from the Ash Sarkars and the Owen Joneses, and possibly even the Navarra Medias, and I'm just going to say it because I like causing trouble. Okay. So, yeah, I think what we need is movements that are inspired by heroes, like people like Ethel Singleton. I don't know whether people will have come across her, but she was in that film Beyond the Rent Strike, which is about the Kirby rent strikes in Liverpool. I can never ever get that woman out of my mind. Once you've seen that film and you've seen her speak, you realise that these are the kinds of people that we need to be platforming. These are the kinds of people that we need leading movements. It's the kind of passion that we heard from you in the room this evening. That's what we need. That's what we need to be embracing and nurturing if we want to stand any chance. And I think that Dave is absolutely right. I think that things can happen quickly and numbers can grow quickly if you're matching up what's happening within society with movements, with genuine left movements that have passionate people within them. And we are going into a brutal time. There's no question about that. And people are going to be really feeling this year. So I agree as well with the comments that we need to be doing things within our local communities. It's easier to get funding and it's easier to be able to do things within your local communities if you do have elected councillors that can access resources and network, because a lot of us are pushed for time. But anyone who isn't pushed for time and is able to do that definitely needs to be doing that, because this movement that we're growing now needs to be different in a lot of ways to the one that we grew unexpectedly under Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party. I think it needs to look different and it needs to act differently as well. We can't be perceived as being po-faced and looking down on working class communities. We've got to be really careful with our messaging as well, I think. So I'll just read out something from our press release just so that everybody's aware of where we're at within Resist. Because within Resist, we did actually register a political party called System Change, and that is what the vehicle that we were going to go with. But we have this other opportunity. The Electoral Commission are really picky about what names you can register a political party under. You can't use anything now with the name Labour in it. But as someone has pointed out, you know, there's a lot of name recognition for Labour within low-income communities and within working class communities and within our wider left community. So that name recognition does count for something. And all we've heard from people since the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn and the left within the Labour Party is that what we actually need is a socialist Labour Party. So this Socialist Labour Party has the heritage and also has the name. So it's our belief that the current trajectory of the corporate Labour Party has nothing to offer the working class of the UK and is simply mirroring the outlook of the Conservative Party. In fact, we believe, to quote former Labour MP George Galloway, that they are two cheeks of the same backside. We believe that Resist's founder Chris Williamson, alongside SLP leader Arthur Scargill, can provide a unifying effect for socialists across the UK. Both Chris and Arthur have an unparalleled reputation for integrity, honesty, and standing in solidarity with their class and those in struggle, and they are both from working class backgrounds as well. We're excited to offer a genuine alternative to neoliberalism, imperialism, and racism. Together, we will seek to unite the working class in a mass movement that will offer a genuine opportunity for our class to re-engage with politics. And as our founder, Chris Williamson, rightly states, this is an historic opportunity to build a genuine alternative to all the mainstream parties sitting in Parliament who prioritise the interests of corporate capitalism over the interests of working class communities. Thanks, comrades.
I think the discussion has moved a little bit on from is Labour dead, and it's moving into the next discussion, the future of the left. And I think the division was always a bit artificial, so I'm glad that it's taken the turn that it has in the various contributions. We've talked a lot about mass movements, and we've talked a lot about historical experience. And it's certainly true that mass movements in opposition to capitalism will emerge. The poll tax, the anti-poll tax movement's a great example of that. And the same with a whole series of protest movements in my lifetime have had that function. It's also possible that enough is enough may well take that form, although I'm increasingly doubtful that it will, but that's another question, I think. The question we then have to ask ourselves is how are those movements of mass discontent, and indeed the current strike wave, how is that turned into political action? And what is the relationship between that sort of mass discontent and politics? Because it seems to me, comrades, that if we don't focus on that pattern, all that we will get is a series of episodic movements. They may be very large, they may, as Dave has said, encompass millions of people, but what they won't leave behind is any sort of permanent form. Comrades may come out of the poll tax movement and join a particular left group. Comrades who are currently on strike may also be drawn into left politics. But in and of themselves, those sorts of movements, without some sort of political form, and above all a political programme, will, I think, not establish any sort of permanent form. So that's why my point was to begin with the argument of the need for a Marxist party to see how that would develop, and not to ignore Labour and its place in that battle. And I would still argue that the fight within Labour and the fight around the nature of Labour is the key question. Because the battle for ideas, the battle for a programme, is also a break from the wrong ideas, the pro-capitalist ideas, the reformist ideas that many people associate with the Labour Party. And if we decide just that we're going to have a programme which is slightly to the left of Labour, that is, in a sense, trying to sort of pull people from Labourism, then I think all we will do is remain trapped within that. And I think that has been the real fault of the left, that we've not called for a real break with Labourism. Tony referred to the relationship between British Labour and British imperialism, to coin the title of a book. And the comrade there from India also referred to that relationship. But it is an important battle of ideas, not just material forces. I think that we also have to take into account. So the fight is an international one, but it's the fight for party and for programme. Comrade Richard referred to the historical experience of the socialist movement, and there's a lot to learn from that. That the small groups of Marxists began with the programme and then transformed that quality into quantity, and that's what I think we should be attempting to develop today in those mass movements. But it's actually the politics that count. Thank you, comrades.
Well, comrades, it's been a great discussion. Sorry it wasn't longer, but I want to say, well, first of all, just a very quick point. Stan said all our differences are just tactical, we should get together. I'm afraid that a general that pursues the wrong tactics loses the battle. The tactics are crucial. And on that question, I would like to mention really to take up what Dave said. He ended up, in my opinion, conceding exactly the point that I'm making, that the key is not what the Socialist Party can build on its own, but the key is a discussion among the people that really count, which is in the arena of the trade unions. Let the unions discuss, of course, with every left group and every individual and everybody who has ideas, but it's the crucial thing is to split the unions from the Labour Party and to build a mass party of Labour. Yes, of course, in a way you could say the party is not dead. The Labour Party is dead because it's not a party of Labour. As Starmer has said, it's a centre party. Actually, it's a right-wing party. It's not the party of Labour because it won't even allow its members to stand on picket lines. What would the original founders of the Labour Party have said about that? It was founded precisely to defend the right of trade unions to go on strike. That was what the Labour Party was formed for. Now, how will a new party come? Actually, I can give you a preview now. It already exists in microcosm, in my area, in Newham. And I want to tell you, I'm just going to finish by telling you the little story of what happened in Newham. Newham has great traditions. It was the area where Keir Hardie became the first Labour MP. It was the area where Sylvia Pankhurst spent a lot of time, spent many years organising workers and women workers in that constituency. It was just down the road from where George Lansbury led a kind of prototype of the Liverpool struggle when he said that was where the slogan came from, better to break the law than break the poor. He led the popular strike, the popular defiance of the government, and went to jail, a future leader of the Labour Party. That was when Labour was Labour. But in Newham now, we were expelled. Not just expelled, West Ham and East Ham Labour Party were shut down overnight without any process whatsoever, simply shut down. And what did we do? We formed Newham Socialist Labour. Newham Socialist Labour, in, by the way, the most solid working class area almost in the country perhaps. It's got the two biggest Labour MPs majorities in the country. It's got a directly elected mayor, Labour. It's got, until now, 100% Labour council and so on. In that area, Newham Socialist Labour is the only active force in that actually operating and recruiting and mobilising and organising on the ground. We stood candidates against Labour in the recent council elections. We got 2,000 votes in total for our candidates in particular wards, but we also put up a candidate for the whole of the borough, Newham. We put up a candidate for mayor who got over 5,000 votes. That is the way that it's going to go. But I have to say something, and I'm sorry, Dave, I have to mention this point. We would have had 7,000 or 8,000 votes, except for the fact that at the last minute, the Socialist Party decided to stand a candidate against us for the mayor of Newham. Now that is sectarianism, I'm sorry, and that is something that we have to overcome. The key is not what the little groups do and how many votes they can get, or, you know, I mean, Tusk has been putting up candidates for 20 years and getting, I'm sorry, pathetic and pitiful votes. I've seen headlines in the Socialist about adding up all the votes in all the hitherto elections and saying, look how many thousands of votes. I'm sorry, but the monster raving loony party could say the same about the number of votes they got if you add them all together. Now, I'm saying this, I was in Militant for 30 years. I was a full-timer for Militant for 20 years. I'm saying this with sadness because I respect, Dave, I respect all the comrades of the Socialist Party who have a clearer political perspective than any of the other left groups, but they made a big mistake because they have admitted, Dave admitted today, the key is not what a little sect outside on the fringes can do in putting up candidates and so on. The key is having that debate with the mass organisations, with the trade unions, and forming a real mass party. That's why I say, unfortunately, this idea of hiving off, I'm not talking about the Socialist Party now, I'm talking about Arthur Scargill's party, Chris Williamson's latest venture and so on. They're great comrades and I fully respect them, but that is not the way. We have to build from the unions, as Ian has shown the way, and he's shown the way to the whole trade union movement. Thanks.
Right, comrades, thank you very much for a fraternal, respectful and friendly discussion. Let's keep the ongoing discussions in that manner. We face the possibility of real tumult in this society, and we've got to be, any form of socialist has got to be prepared to work together to make sure the ideas of socialism dominate over the ideas of fascism. We need to work together in that tumult. We've got to remember the women and the children who will take the brunt have taken the brunt of austerity and will take the brunt again unless we organise, and we cannot organise without organising amongst the women. We've got to remember the need to organise amongst the black and Asian populations and amongst the migrant workers. We have to drop this idea of migrant workers being somehow other. The conditions that migrant workers are in at the moment is dreadfully appalling, and the unions need to be in there organising to make sure they are not working just for gangmasters. I personally am in Left Unity, and I work with PALS, an attempt to bring left groups together in calm and sensible discussion like we've had today. We will have our differences, but let's take from this the fact that we can and should be able to talk to each other and discuss with each other, knowing that all of us have our feet firmly in the working class, and that's where our loyalty lies. Thank you, comrades, for an excellent meeting.